Well, moving on to Ukraine, which is braving a tough, cold, and sometimes dark winter after Russia repeatedly attacked power stations and other energy infrastructure. Millions have been impacted by disrupted supplies of water, heating, and electricity. Yet, Ukraine's energy sector has persevered. Its grid is stabilizing. Energy provider Ukrenergo said there's been no power deficit in Ukraine for the last 18 days. But Russia's constant attacks are threatening the surviving energy infrastructure. Now, Ukraine's Minister of Energy was in Zagreb to meet with several European counterparts to discuss efforts to strengthen Ukraine and Europe's energy security.
Another issue is, of course, renewables. And we could think about solar first, wind, of course, and that is also the solution for quick decentralization of the generation. So, and even from the military threats, for Russians, if we could imagine that next winter we still will be in war and they could attack us again, I mean the energy sector again and again, it's very hard to target so many facilities around the country, even when they could use missiles.
Well, to talk to us more about energy support for Ukraine, I'm joined now by the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, Geoffrey Pyatt in Washington. Geoffrey, thanks for joining me. Ukraine's energy infrastructure has proven resilient, as we've heard, but it is highly vulnerable at this point. What are your concerns in this area?
So my biggest concern, of course, is that the Kremlin will continue systematically trying to dismantle Ukraine's energy grid, the way Putin has been doing since the middle of October. I think in Kyiv, there's a great sense of satisfaction and pride at the resilience that their system has demonstrated, the flexibility that the Ukrainians have achieved by cannibalizing from one system to another. Critically important support from across the international community, in particular our G7 group. And I would commend Germany's leadership as G7 president last year in establishing a specific energy-focused group that I've been helping to coordinate from the U.S. side. The United States has put a lot of resources into this, $53 million of equipment, which we delivered last year. We have additional appropriations now from our Congress of $1.1 billion.
Well, Geoffrey, maybe quickly to that, talking about those $1.1 billion, I mean, what sort of solutions are Ukrainian allies like the U.S. looking at in terms of energy support for Ukraine going forward, whether that's in the midterm or maybe even after the war?
So we're trying to do two things at the same time. One is to undo the damage that Vladimir Putin has done, so restoring transformer stations, helping to build resilience in the grid. And that's something that we're working with very closely on with our European partners. And then also addressing the challenge that you just had Minister Heroshenko talking about, which is to build back better, to build a new Ukrainian energy system, which is more resilient, more decentralized, more European, more focused on renewables, rather than the old Soviet system that Ukraine had depended on in the past.
Right. I wanted to ask if you agreed with the energy minister's view that expanding renewables in Ukraine would make the grid more resilient to Russian attacks. What's your take on this?
He's exactly right. It's true for the rest of Europe as well. That is, the greatest source of energy security is an energy system which is decoupled from Russian oil and gas and which is much more focused on renewables. Ukraine has substantial potential in the areas of wind, of solar, biomass. Ukraine also has one of Europe's largest nuclear fleets. The United States and other European partners are working closely with the Ukrainians in that area as well. So we see a substantial capacity for Ukraine to emerge after the war, not just as self-sufficient in energy, but as a major provider of energy to the rest of Europe, as Ukraine has been in the electricity sector up until October when these attacks began.